I'm Steve Yates, Associate Director and Marketing Director at the University Press of Mississippi. We appreciate your tuning in. Today on this video, we have a panel focused on the new book, Love Letter from Pig, My Brother's Story of Freedom Summer. I'll introduce our panelists. Julie Kabat is the author of Love Letter from Pig. Julie has toured internationally as a composer, performer, singer, and storyteller. She previously worked for over 40 years as a teaching assistant in public schools. Her brother, Luke, came to Mississippi during Freedom Summer in 1964, and her book tells his inspiring story. Andreesa Thompson was one of the many students at the Meridian Freedom School, where Luke taught during that summer. Her younger sisters were with her there. She was born in Meridian and later relocated to Albany, New York. In Albany, she was a teacher for 9 years at the Robin Daycare Center, and after that, she worked as a teaching assistant for 10 years at the Albany County Head Start. Then she worked until retirement as a mental hygiene therapy aide at the Capital District Psychiatric Center. Andreesa returns to Mississippi each summer. Gail Falk was a 20-year-old Radcliffe student when she went to Mississippi in late June 1964. She remained in Meridian after the summer project for several months, then returned there in 1966 as the Mississippi writer for the Southern Courier newspaper. After leaving Mississippi, she attended Yale Law School and then practiced law in West Virginia for 18 years, representing coal miners with black lung and children and adults with developmental disabilities. In 1989, she moved with her family to Vermont.
So, Gail and Andreesa, thank you for joining me today. The title today is You Made History. Let's talk about Freedom Summer and its aftermath. So, Gail, what was the purpose of Freedom Summer?
Since the late 50s and early 60s, civil rights organizations had been working on voter registration throughout the South. But in Mississippi, they had encountered a total blockage. People that tried to register to vote were fired from their jobs. They had their houses shot at or burned. Some people were even murdered. And in the North and in the rest of the country, nobody knew about it. The major news organizations were not providing any publicity, and they were unable to get the FBI or any external law enforcement involved. So the major civil rights organizations came up with the idea that they would invite college students from the North to come to Mississippi for the summer. And each of those students who came would have family and churches and schools and newspapers back home, so that if anything happened while we were there, somebody would hear about it up north and they would be contacting their legislators and their newspapers, and hopefully that was the concept of Freedom Summer, was that voter registration could go forward, and if there were problems, there would be intervention. So we were there to, I guess, as a major protective shield.
Wow. So you were at your orientation in Ohio on June 22nd,
Right.
when you learned about the disappearance of the 3 civil rights workers, Mickey Schwerner, James Chaney, and Andrew Goodman. What was your reaction on hearing the news?
Many reactions all at once, being stunned that this violence that we were going to prevent or call attention to was happening so immediately. And that, grounding that this is serious. This is really serious. One of the people that was missing was described in such a way that I originally thought the person that was Andrew Goodwin was actually a friend of mine who was also a 21-year-old from New York. So I had this first immediate feeling that my good friend was involved. And then shortly afterwards, I learned that it was not my good friend. And I guess I would call it an epiphany, that it didn't matter that it wasn't my good friend, that we were all of us that were involved in this, were in this together, and that we were all going as one.
Wow. So, Andreesa, how did you know the Cheney family, including James and his younger brother, Ben?
Well, James Cheney has always been like a friend of ours. When he would be at school, especially at the high school, he would talk to kids. He was a very friendly person. And sometimes he would be up in our neighborhood talking to us. And I believe at one point he even lived close enough to us that we played with his little brother, Ben. And Ben was always a go-getter. He was always doing something. And we had fun with them. And it was like just people that your neighbors across town, your neighbors next door, but it was just all of us together. And it was good. He was a very nice, friendly guy. And when he talked to you, he was right on point. He talked to the point and let you know what was going on, gave you information when you needed it. And when it was time for us to talk, he would let us, and then he would say, okay, time to be quiet for a minute, let me talk. So he gave us a lot of information, and he was a very soft-spoken person, very nice young man.
Wow. What do you remember about hearing the news of James's disappearance?
Oh, it was devastating because the moment we heard that he had disappeared and nobody could find him, the first thing that came to the mind of the majority of Black people that I knew, that they've killed him. That was the first thing that came to mind. And we were talking in a group, and my mom and a couple of neighbors and all, and they were saying, they've killed him. He's just not going to get in his car and drive someplace and disappear and not come back or not get in touch with somebody. So my mom knew right away that they were killed. And it was really sad. And we kept saying how we were going to miss him and we needed to find him. And it was just a sad situation that we were thinking as young kids, we were thinking that why would somebody be so mean to kill these guys? And we met Andrew and Michael a couple of times, but not that many times that we met them. But when they got ready to go to Philadelphia, Mississippi, we were all gathered down on 5th Street to see them off or talk to them before they left. And that was it. And it was like, we were talking to them. They can't be gone anywhere. Somebody needs to find them. And it was really devastating because whatever we would say or whatever we would do, you always knew in the back of your mind they were dead. You always knew that from the beginning.
Wow. So I don't know if you want to add anything about your mother's reaction. You've told us some.
My mother tried to tell us that, well, the first thing she said is that's why I want you guys to stay together, stay away from areas that you should not be in. There's a certain part of town that you couldn't go into, being Black. And she just told us, stay together. Don't go anywhere by yourself. And basically not to trust anybody. Just certain people you just didn't trust because you didn't know what they would do to you.
Wow. Yikes.
On August 4th, 1964, the FBI discovered the bodies of the three young men buried deep in a new earthen dam. The parents wanted their sons to be buried together, but that was not allowed in Mississippi, where segregation demanded separate graveyards. The Cheney family planned a private funeral, but Gail and Luke realized that the entire community was traumatized and would need an opportunity to grieve together.
So, Gail, you and Luke led a committee that planned a march through Meridian from several directions that would converge on the church where the funeral was taking place. There would be a public service for the community outside the church. In my book, I quote Luke describing the somber and dignified march. Reverend Culpepper and I led the Negroes from the South Side on a walk from Calvary Baptist Church to First Union. We began to walk. Reverend Culpepper has a great craggy face, a face which tells a story of great suffering and great struggle. He is crippled and he walks with a grotesque stride, which brings his body high in the air and then low to the ground. He has struggled long and hard, and it will take much more than a crippling disease to turn him back. He was proud to be leading his people through the streets of Meridian. As we walked, more and more people joined our group. There were young people and old people. It was particularly moving to see the old women helping each other along, arm in arm, tottering along down Freedom's Road. A police car moved slowly beside us with Negro policemen inside. They were determined to protect us, and it was comforting to have them there. White people came out of their houses as we walked past. We were dressed in dark clothes, and we walked silently and with great dignity. I feel certain that some of the white people must have felt sympathy, and that some of them would even have joined us were they not afraid of the disapproval of their neighbors. We reached the church without any incidents, and there we met the Negroes who had walked from other parts of town. There were probably over 1,000 people gathered there in front of the First Union Baptist Church. The memorial service for James Cheney was an experience I will never forget. The service was a perfect blend of religious respect for the dead and a call to struggle for freedom. So, Gail, what was the march like? And what do you feel it accomplished?
As Luke wrote, it was very solemn. As we were walking, we didn't know how it was going to go. We didn't know if at any second we would be harassed by angry white people, or we didn't know if some of the young Black people would be so angry that they would feel they couldn't participate. But it was just 100% a quiet, solemn way to feel our grief, to be together, to show the world that we were reacting with a very solemn grief. There have been a lot of videos and show. You can see a lot of the service that came after the march in movies and films of Freedom Summer, and it was a powerful experience. I mean, Luke's and my part of it all was just getting together the march. We didn't plan the memorial service or have anything to do with that except just being there like everybody else. But it there's such a combination of feelings that everybody had: sadness, anger, determination to go forward, fear that we shouldn't be out here exposing ourselves, gratitude that so many other people felt the same way and were coming out and walking with us. It was just a emotion-filled evening.
Wow. So, Andreesa, you were 17 that summer.
Mhm.
What was the experience of the march like for you?
It was really a sad march. It was like you're walking someplace and you're not allowed to speak. And it wasn't that nobody told us we couldn't speak. It was just like you were marching and you be quiet for a minute to gather your thoughts and see what was going on. And as we walked, we kind of kept an eye out for what was going on, because sometimes the little kids that went kept thinking that maybe they're going to set the dogs on us, or maybe they're going to put the hoses on us. And we would put the little children between us and have the little ones and the older ones on the outside of the march. But my mom told us to not get behind the march, not to get in front of the march, to stay kind of in the middle and stay close with each other. And I remember two of my sisters were close by me and we were holding hands. And my one sister, Pat, was holding my hand so tight because she was afraid, but she went. And she was really holding it tight, but she didn't speak. And we just walked until we got to the place. Because when we joined the march, they were already in process. And we just joined them at some point and marched alongside with them. But it was really sad. And you just didn't know what to say or how to say it. So we just kept quiet and just marched.
Wow. And the service also.
It was great, yes.
Very
Mhm.
powerful.
I remember his mom spoke, I believe. And I don't exactly remember what she said, but she was powerful. You know, she had lost her son and she was very powerful with her words.
Yeah. Wow. Gail, you returned to Meridian in the fall. You didn't go back to college right away. And in November, Luke was able to leave medical school and return on a clinical rotation for 6 weeks. At this time, you both engaged in protests along with teenagers. You and Luke were arrested for testing compliance with the Civil Rights Act. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Sure. The 1964 Civil Rights Act had been passed by Congress during the summer, but during the summer, we were told to not try to test any public accommodations. It would distract from the focus of the project on voter registration. But in the fall, that restriction was lifted, and we were working with a smaller group of teenagers that were coming to the Freedom School after school. Of course, they had to go to regular school during the day, and some of them had sports or other activities. So we were working with a stalwart, committed group of young people that wanted to do something. And as we talked with them and talked with ourselves, it seemed like the things that we could do, that they could do, that we could do together, would be to test the compliance of restaurants and other public accommodations to see whether they were actually complying with the law. We didn't know. So we we first made a list of the restaurants in Meridian. Meridian was a pretty big city. At that time, it was about 50,000 people. So there were a good many restaurants, sit-down restaurants, drugstores, and five and dime stores with counters. And then there were a bunch of drive-up places like A&W or creamy stands. So we started with a schedule of going out to see whether these places were willing to serve African Americans or not. And some of them were. Some of the downtown stores like Kresge's, their lunch counter, they served our students. But some of the others were not. And there was a day. Do you want me to tell about actually going out and visiting, or are you going to go over that?
Steve, do we have time?
Oh yeah, go right ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, I was arrested separately for Luke in a different situation, but the day that I went out, I had 4 or 5 Freedom Schools students in the car and one of the teachers. And first we went to a drugstore, Tudor and Sims, that whose owner was very hostile. And we went in, asked to be served at the counter, and he just said, "Get out of here." And we saw him pick up the phone, and we thought he was calling the police. And sure enough, a police car showed up right behind us. And the police car pulled me over and said, "Take those young people downtown. They're not wanted out here in this part of town." And I got back in the car and I continued going, and the policeman continued following me. We were going to a A&W root beer stand. And pretty soon his light came on and he pulled me over, and he told me to drive down to the police station, which I did. And he told me I was being charged with making an illegal turn. And that was the charge. So I couldn't continue. We couldn't continue testing facilities that day. And but when I went to court on Saturday, 2 days later, I was convicted of making an illegal turn, and said I didn't think I'd done anything wrong and I didn't want to pay the fine. So I went to jail for 4 days. Yeah.
Wow. Well, Gail, you've told me that you feel it was an honor to be an actor in history, not a bystander. And Andreesa, speaking about what you learned in the Freedom School, you've said, "We didn't just study history, we made history." So to both of you, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for listening.
Mm.